Welcome to the CUFI Weekly. My name is Kasim Hafeez, and thank you for joining us for this week's show. I would be remiss if I didn't start with addressing the tragedy which happened in Surfside, Florida. As I speak, as I record this, there are rescue attempts to rescue those who are trapped underneath the condo which collapsed. Israel sent IDF search and rescue troops to assist with the rescue. CUFI sends their thoughts and prayers to everyone in Surfside and everyone impacted by that awful tragedy. So, Iran. Iran had an election, free, fair, and democratic. Of course not. It had an election, but that's kind of where it ended. So, Iran had an election 2 weeks ago. The winner, Ebrahim Raisi, hugely tipped by the regime. So let's look at Iran's election. Firstly, the State Department released a statement the day after going, this was not the will of the Iranian people, essentially. Of all of the elections that have been held in the Islamic Republic, this was the lowest voter turnout. I think around 30 million Iranians did not turn up to vote. And why is that? So how Iran's election works is you have the Guardians Council. This is a body of unelected religious clerics, headed by Supreme Leader, who is also unelected, Ayatollah Khamenei. And they looked at this list of, I believe, 597 candidates and went, none of you can run, apart from these 7 that we chose. And that made their favorite, Ebrahim Raisi, the favorite. I mean, when you get rid of over 580, 90 candidates, it kind of makes it easy for your guy to do better, especially when you get to choose who runs and who doesn't. Just to give you some context, the Guardians Council have never let a female run for Iran's election. They got rid of perceived moderates, anyone who supported Hassan Rouhani, the current president, Hassan Rouhani, who is the current president, and then we had our list. Raisi came out on top. Now, who's Ebrahim Raisi? Well, he is well known for being the former head of Iran's judiciary, a judiciary which is one of the world's top executioners. Not something to be proud of by any stretch of the imagination. In last year alone, they killed, because essentially Iran's justice system is not just. Trials happen behind closed doors. It's also been condemned by many international governments as they will take dual nationals who hold Iranian citizenship and other citizenships, like British, and keep them in prison using them as bargaining chips. So when I say Iran's government has killed, that's what I mean. These are closed-door trials with little evidence, and essentially Raisi oversaw this. But shockingly, that is not the worst of what Raisi has done. He was responsible and actively involved in these show trials, essentially a purge that the Iranian government undertook in 1988. While this was covered up, while nobody knows the full details, by research done with various human rights organizations, they believe the amount of people executed by the Iranian regime, Raisi played an active part in this, is in the thousands. Some people put that number at 5,000. And this is the man who is now going to lead Iran. If we ever had any questions, if we ever were wondering, what is this regime about? What is the regime in Tehran really about? They have made it crystal clear. This was their guy. This was the guy they wanted to win, and this was the guy that won. And he is a butcher. He is a murderer, and he is already sanctioned by the United States and the EU for human rights abuses. So we have the president-elect of Iran who is already sanctioned by the United States and the EU. What does that say? But let's pause right there for a second, because we are still talking to Iran. We're still negotiating with them to try and get back into the deal. And the latest is the United States, President Biden, ordered airstrikes against Iranian proxy groups in Syria and Iraq. These Kataib Hezbollah, who are funded, who are set up, who have a direct working relationship with the Revolutionary Guard Corps, who take orders from the Revolutionary Guard Corps. You may remember the previous head was killed when a US airstrike took him and head of the Revolutionary Guard, Kasim Soleimani, out. So the United States has struck these targets. Why? Because they have been attacking US troops. In Iraq and Syria, Iranian-funded, Iranian-supported proxies have been trying to kill American troops. So we struck their targets. We struck places where they were holding weapons, but we're still talking to Iran. It makes no sense to me. On the one hand, we're seeing this nefarious activity. On the other hand, we're seeing the sham that they call an election. We're seeing who they elected to lead the country. A man who has no love for the West, who has no love for freedom, who has no love for humanity alone. He has been responsible for the direct murder of thousands of people. Yet we're still talking about getting back into the Iran deal. How can we excuse that behavior when we're seeing it play out? How can we excuse that behavior when we've actively worked against it just in the last few days? This just doesn't seem to make sense. And at CUFI, we've always said the alternative to a deal is not war. The alternative to this deal is a better deal. It's not a case of deal or no deal. This is not a game show. This is a case of a better deal, one that prevents Iran from gaining nuclear weapons, one that prevents Iran from spreading terror all over the world, one that prevents Iran from attacking Israel and American soldiers in Iraq, one that does not divorce the two issues, like on the one hand you have a regime who's dealing with Iran's nuclear weapons, and on the other hand you have a regime which is brutalizing Iran's civilians and spreading terror globally. They're the same regime. If you don't know that now, you never will. So we have to be vigilant of what is happening. We have to pay close attention, because there may come a time, if this progresses, if this deal advances, where CUFI will need you, our members, our friends, those who stand up for what's right, those who stand up for freedom and human rights, to speak out. Maybe that day will come soon. I don't know. But we have to continue to educate others about what Iran is doing. We have to continue to educate others that we need a better deal. If we're going to have a deal, it needs to be comprehensive, and it needs to change Iran's behavior, which was only magnified with the last deal. They increased their terrorism. They increased support to their proxies. So as we approach July 4th, I would say take care of yourselves, be safe, look after each other, and we have to stand up to make sure that America is strong, that America is protecting our interests, is protecting our servicemen, and we do not yield to a regime which takes pride and pleasure in burning American flags and chanting death to America. Until next time, this is Kasim Hafeez. For Zion's sake, do not hold your peace. Thanks for checking out today's episode of CUFI Weekly. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest news from the Middle East, along with topics involving US-Israel relations, please be sure to like and subscribe. And remember to click that notification button so that you are notified every time a new show is uploaded.